أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We have been studying Qadr, and we were studying the second portion of 26th word, which was starting or addressing the question of how to, let me find the exact word, how divine determining is compatible with the power of choice. And the main theme, as I'm repeating this for a few weeks, but by the end of the first topic, the author already established his point of view about Qadr. The second topic is not trying to describe the nature of divine determining or power of choice, but rather it is clearing up or sweeping away what we would consider as a contradiction between the two. So the question in here, reading the question in this sense, how is divine determining compatible with the power of choice? The asker has the tendency or the underlying impression that they're contradicting each other. And then the author comes out and says, no, all the answers pretty much given in here are, in a sense, saying that what you consider as contradiction is because you are trying to define the nature of divine determining and or power of choice. So he is just clearing these up with the point that he counted so far. And last week we studied the sixth partially, but the sixth was there was a footnote saying that this is a truth addressing exact or precise scholars in particular. So it's a little bit of a deeper than the other ones, because this topic has been like a matter of debate among Kalam scholars. I will start reading from the beginning of the sixth again, briefly summarize what I remember as our conclusion from last time, and continue with the if you say part. Because this, from there on, we didn't discuss. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. According to Maturidi, inclination, which is the essence of the power of choice, is a theoretical or relative matter and may be attributed to God's servants. But Ash'ari considered it to have existence, so they did not attribute it to them. However, according to Ash'ari, the power of disposal with an inclination is a theoretical matter, which makes the inclination and the disposal together a relative matter, lacking a definite external existence. Theoretical or relative matters do not require causes through which, for their existence, necessity would intervene and nullify the will and the power of choice. Rather, if the cause of the theoretical matter acquires the weight of preference, the theoretical matter may become actual and existent, in which case, at that juncture, it may be abandoned. The Quran may say to a person at that point, this is evil, do not do it. Indeed, if God's servants had been the creators of their actions and had had the power to create, then their wills would have been removed. For an established rule in the sciences of religion and philosophy is, if a thing is not necessary, it may not come into existence of itself. That is, there has to be a cause for a thing to come into existence. The cause necessarily requires the effect, then no power of choice would remain. So very briefly, what I remember, what we discussed here is, so the author starts by two schools of thought, Maturidi and Ash'ari. So Maturidi said inclination is a relative matter. Since it does not have an external existence, it can be attributed to the abd, because like abd means the one who does not have any power to create or anything of that sort. So this is why if it's an existing entity, it cannot be attributed to a creation. Ash'ari says no, inclination is an external existence, but disposal of inclination, as if what I understand is Ash'ari thinks of inclination as a tool itself and says, no, it's an existing entity. We cannot attribute that to the abd, let's say human in this case, but disposal, or if you like, making a decision or use of that tool, let's put it this way, use of that tool is a relative thing, so it can be attributed. And the author is saying that whichever way you take, either take it as the inclination itself being a relative matter or disposal of inclination being a relative matter, doesn't really matter which way you go. But he says this, now I'm reading from here, which makes the inclination and the disposal together a relative matter, lacking a definite external existence. The author's standpoint is, whichever way you go, the real gist of the matter here is the inclination or the disposal over that inclination is a relative matter, lacking a definite external existence. And this is what really is the gist of the point here. Then, now building on top of that, theoretical or relative matters do not require causes, through which, for their existence, necessity would intervene and nullify the will and the power of choice. And for the rest of the text, my limited understanding here is the author is talking about human power of choice. It's not a will, like it's not willing and putting things into existence. It's a power of choice. So the choices are being put in front of you and you choose one of them. So then the author says, if human was able to create his actions, then actually power of choice wouldn't be there. Because for a thing to come into existence, as the author says in here, for a thing to come into being, into existence, if you consider it to have an external existence, like I want to raise my hand and it's coming into being, if a thing is not necessary, it may not come into existence of itself. So for something to come into existence, it has to become necessarily existent. And if I was the creator of my choices, my actions, then as I incline towards something, as if the author is making the distinction that your inclination is not a will, but your inclination is just making a choice. And a choice is relatively saying that I choose this over the other one. Whereas will means this, like without any choice or whatever, you are saying that this is what it is going to be like. And in such a case, which is not even possible for human beings, I mean, we do not experience such a thing. The author in here is saying that human power of choice is nothing like that. But if it was like that, then with the meaning that we understand as choice wouldn't exist. Because as you would incline towards something, then since assuming that power of choice is, human is the creator of their actions, then it would come into being. Which means, again, now thinking in terms of how humans are functioning, you wouldn't have a chance to think otherwise. So, long story short, with all these reasoning, the author is saying that if you carefully look at how your power of choice functions, you're just choosing among options. So and by its nature, it's not giving existence to anything really. Again, it boils down to, I am mixing up, comparing my power of choice with the absolute will of the creator. And the author says, because again and again, you try to compare the two by trying to define the two, by trying to explain the nature of the two, you are mixing up the two. And by saying that human is the creator of their action is mixing up power of choice with divine will. Your power of choice is not divine will. And if it was, then you wouldn't be able to choose anything. The moment you incline towards something, then that thing would come into existence, and then choice would disappear for you. Okay, so this is my understanding of what is being said so far. If anybody wants to add anything, please go ahead. If not, I will continue with if you say. Okay, then I continue. If you say preference without a cause or attribute to cause the preference is impossible. Preference without a cause. Let me tercih bila murajjih, right? Terajjuh bila murajjih. Okay, so it says tercih bila murajjih is muhal, like preference without a chooser, without a cause. Oh, okay, sorry, I was talking. Okay. Preference without a cause, or okay, let me read it. I am not super happy with that translation, but let me first read what's written. Preference without a cause or attribute to cause the preference is impossible, whereas the theoretical or relative matter we call human acquisition sometimes does a thing and sometimes does not. If there is nothing to cause the preference, preference without something to cause it would necessarily occur, and this demolishes one of the most important bases of theology. I think the translation made it even harder to understand. So the question in here is asking, if I am to translate it in my own words, choosing without a reason to choose is impossible, is the claim of the asker here. The asker says, choosing something without a reason to choose one over another is impossible. Let's put a question mark. Why is that impossible? Where are you getting this from? Or dear asker? Because the author says, actually, no, you're wrong. But let's put it aside. And also keep in mind that this is also our modern day perspective in terms of saying that if a thing happens like this, because there is a reason for it to happen like that. So for example, I drop the ball and it goes down, although it could have gone up, because it's not equally distant. Like the ball going down versus ball going up are not equally likely. One of them is more likely, like ball going down. So this is why it goes down. Is the deterministic and materialistic perspective of today's day and age. And the author is coming, like the asker here is asking a similar question. A choice without a reason to choose, or without superiority, without preference, does not happen. It cannot happen. It's impossible. Whereas the theoretical or relative matter we call human acquisition sometimes does a thing and sometimes does not. If there is nothing to cause the preference, if there is no necessary chooser or superiority, then that means human is going to choose among the two things which are equally likely, which contradicts the initial claim that the asker was making. Because initially, the asker said that it is not possible to choose two things if they are equally likely. You choose one thing over the other because it has some property which is superior than the other one. This was the initial question. And this is pretty much determinism. Like if there are two apples in front of you and if you are choosing one of them, this is because for whatever reason, one of the apples are better than the other, or there's a reason to choose the other apple. This is why you are choosing it. So sorry for so many examples, but I'm trying to express the idea behind the question. The answer, a being preferable without something to make it preferable is impossible. So I'm going to use read the original language here. Terajjuh bila murajjih. So in the first one, he is talking about terjih bila murajjih, choosing without a superiority is impossible, is what the guy is asking here. The author says no. Terjih bila murajjih is possible. Terajjuh bila murajjih is impossible. So terajjuh means something being superior than the other. Murajjih means somebody who is making one thing better than the other. So a being preferable or a being superior without something to make it superior is impossible. That is, a being deemed preferable or superior without a cause or attribute to make it so is impossible. But preference without something to cause it is permissible and occurs. Will is an attribute, and its mark is to perform a work such as that. Okay, it is that much. That question and that answer is that much. So, any comment about that? Is it clear enough or no? Is it not?
Sorry. No, it is clear. Okay. And we have Suhail, right? Yes. I'm sure he will clarify things.
Okay. So Suhail, is everything clear on your end?
I feel like I'm just reading it, so I will let you know.
Okay. Okay. Abdurrahman, please go ahead.
I had a question. So in the previous paragraph, it says, and this demolishes one of the most important bases of theology. And I'm just wondering how this does so, because there's a preference without a cause. So the idea is that you, I guess the argument is you're saying that you have free will, you're making choices, but you're free in it. There's no cause to this, and apparently this somehow demolishes one of the most important bases of theology. And I don't really understand why.
So I feel like the author in here is saying that you are wrong with your idea that this is demolishing important basis of theology. There is a footnote which is not translated here. The footnote right after this sentence, like after the first sentence, says tarajjuh is different, tarjih is different, because original word for this, apparently, which is the rule of theology, is the asker thinks that the rule says tarjih bila murajjih is impossible. The author says, no, it is not tarjih bila murajjih that's impossible. The thing that's impossible is tarajjuh bila murajjih. And right after saying this in here, he says, tarjih and tarajjuh are two very different things. And this is why you are making a mistake. So a most important basis of theology is not being demolished here. The true rule of theology is tarajjuh bila murajjih is impossible. Like two things, one being better than the other, cannot happen inherently. This is what it means. Actually, this was the issue of Satan in Quran. Satan was thinking that I am from fire, Adam is from clay, and fire is inherently better than clay. Nothing is inherently better than any other thing, unless an absolute being chooses one to be better than the other. Like there needs to be a giver of superiority to make one better than the other, one preferable than the other. But as for choosing without superiority, says, no, this is something that will does, and it happens. It's the two are two different. If that makes any sense. Abdurrahman? No?
Yeah, sorry. Just so I can understand it better. If it was possible, if preference without a cause was impossible, or I still don't see how this would demolish one of the most important bases of theology. Like even going into saying that the other statement where being preferable without something to make it preferable is impossible. Yeah, I mean, I just don't understand how either way this would make it demolish one of the bases of theology. Like, what are they trying to say that if we say that creation without intention or something can be chosen without intention, does that like validate creation or make it random? Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to see where the argument is coming from, I guess.
Okay, so the base of theology that is being demolished in here, according to the asker, is this rule. So he says this is a rule of theology. Tercih bila mürejjih is being impossible is a rule of theology, he says. And if, as you are claiming, or author, that free will is this relative matter, and that means tercih bila mürejjih is possible. Therefore, the initial rule of theology, according to the claim of asker, gets demolished. And the author says, no, this is not a rule of theology. Tercih bila mürejjih being impossible is not an important base of theology. You are wrong. It's terajjuh bila murajjih that is a rule of theology. And what is described in here, the sixth, has nothing to do with violating that rule, terajjuh bila murajjih. But in terms of terjih bila murajjih, yes, this is what I am saying. He says this is what happens, and it has nothing to do with being a contradiction.
Can I? Okay, never mind.
Oh, go ahead, please. No. You can.
My question is, how is this practical or relevant, or why does this matter? Because, okay, these sentences exist and these words exist, but what's the point of it then? Because in my life, this doesn't break any basis of theology, I guess. Like, I don't know.
You asking too much. Am I muted? No. You asking too much. Like, the job of Yusuf is just read the paragraph, the sentence, and then give some examples. The rest is yours. So, okay, the way I understand it says in the question, I'm not looking at the translation. I'm trying to translate myself as Yusuf did. The question is choosing or choice without a cause of choice. And the cause here, in its like the real meaning, we're not talking about apparent causes anymore. This is like the real cause of something. So the choice, making a choice, or without a cause, the question says, is impossible. And we making choice. This is the how we understand the power of choice. We are making a choice. And making choice means sometimes you prefer something, sometimes you don't prefer something, or sometimes you choose something and sometimes not choose something, right? You have two options in front of you. You choose one over other. So there's a choice there. There's an as if there's an action there. And hence you need an actor there. So you have to attribute this thing to a cause. And without doing this attribution, it's impossible, says the asker. So this is relevant because the problem with the power of choice, understanding the power of choice, is I would say, the Abdurrahman, you don't have any power to create anything. You cannot, act in that sense. You cannot create anything. But you would say, what do you mean? I create my choice. I cause, right? Abdurrahman causes his choice. He prefers something over another thing, you would say. So there's as if there's the attribution of causality to Abdurrahman. That's the question. Like without thinking that way, it is impossible. But author says, no. The first thing, what is impossible is if you are thinking of two choices, and if one of them is preferable and the other one is not preferable, then there must be a reason, there must be a cause for this, one being more preferable than the other. This is a rule of logic. This is a rule of kalam. But this action of choice, choosing something, can happen without a cause, like without Abdurrahman creating anything. It may happen. And at the last sentence, it says, choosing, or actually power of choice, it says irade, power of choice is an attribute, and its thing is choosing. As if, this is what power of choice does. It just makes the choice. Like the power of sight, how would you define it? You say, oh, it sees, right? So the same way, your power of choice, whatever it is, the irade, chooses. As if, I'm using this in a very loosely, it happens. It's not like, Abdurrahman causes something and this the action of choice happens. It's not that way, author says. Just like, the power of sight or seeing sees, choosing chooses.
Yes, Suhail, please go ahead.
Assalamualaikum. I had to read this multiple times. I think I understand what he's saying. I don't know if it gets translated properly into English. And it's along the lines of what Berkan was saying and what you were saying earlier. But I mean, I guess to answer Abdurrahman's question, what I understand from is the questioner is confused about and like I said, this is my understanding, I could be wrong, but the questioner is confused about the distinction between preference and giving something being. In other words, he's saying that he's under the assumption that if I prefer something, then by necessity, then that something should come into being then. So whereas then he contrasts that by saying human acquisition or the ability to choose, I can do something or do not, and I may not do something. But then he says, if there's nothing to cause the preference, or at least what I understand what he's saying is nothing to make my preference real, preference without something to cause it would necessarily occur. At least from if I understand the English translation right, he's saying that if I prefer something and I can't cause it to be, I want to fly, but I can't actually fly, then what choice do I really have? That's what he's saying. At least that's what I think he's saying is, doesn't this demolish one of the most important bases of theology? In that you're saying I have a choice, and therefore evil is attributed to me, as you were saying earlier, or I make a choice, even though I can't create, but I do make a choice. But the questioner is saying, okay, well, you can make a choice, or you can prefer something, but you can't actually make something happen. So, isn't this a contradiction? I think that's what he's asking, if I understand it correctly. Whereas what Yusuf was saying, the questioner has his basis incorrect, because Nursi corrects him by saying, rather, first look to the thing. Let's look to a bird flying. I can't fly, but a bird flying. That bird flying is preferable, and I know it's preferable because it happens to be, it exists. So therefore, the fact that it's preferred to be that way must be that there must be a cause for it to be that way, external to the bird flying, an agent. That is, as he says, a being deemed preferable or superior without a cause or attribute to make it so is impossible. So he's looking at the being itself, and I think I mentioned this last time. Is looking at reality itself and then making a determination, saying, because I can't fly, even though I prefer to fly, then I don't have a choice. But I'm not using reality. I'm just, using my imagination. Whereas I look to a bird and say, oh, there's an actual being out there flying. Therefore, there must have been a being which preferred that bird to fly in that way. But Nursi says preference without something to cause it is permissible and occurs. Like, I can't fly. I mean, it's my preference to fly, but I can't actually make it happen. That's reality. That's everyday reality. If anything, what that shows is that I can't create, one, and two, I can only make choices in which they follow this order of creation. I can make choices in that domain, and I acquire things when my choice aligns with the order, or something happens to be, or my choice to, or I want to drink a glass of water. It only manifests if I follow the set order in creation. Will is an attribute, and its mark is to perform a work such as that. In other words, I have preferences. Doesn't mean they have to be. Doesn't mean they have to call. Like, I can't, just because I prefer something doesn't mean it has to come into existence. Doesn't mean it has to be. That doesn't negate my choice. It doesn't mean like, oh, it's fatalistic now and I have no choice whatsoever in the matter. And why is evil attributed to me? But because that's not the principle of reality. The principle is simply looking at creation, saying, I guess using creation was a little bit lower term, but looking at it, what happens to be out there and saying, oh, if this bird flying happens to be, then it was preferred to be that way from beyond the bird. The bird had nothing to do with it. So there was a choice being made. That's the rule. That's the inherent rule of reality of this universe. Not the rule that if you prefer something, it has to be, because where is that rule written out? Where is that rule shown in existence? Because as the questioner rightly says, something can happen or not happen if I have a preference. That's the actual reality. And when I do make a choice, then I see the effect of that choice. And in one sense, what he points out, the questioner, that something happens or doesn't happen, points out the fact that I don't create, but I do have a choice. I do have a preference, and that preference only manifests within a particular domain, or like particular circumstances. So that's, I think, what he's saying. I could be totally wrong, but and I think he sums it up by saying will is an attribute. In other words, I don't know if he's talking about whose will he's talking about, maybe human will, but the actually, I'll leave it at that. I'm not sure whose will he's referring to, other than maybe human will. And the only will, the only utility, the purpose of my will, or my attribute of choosing, is for me to prefer something over another, though I can't create. And if I prefer something within whatever the order is, then that's my responsibility. And as it pertains to God's will, what I see from creation is that if something happens to be, then he preferred it to be that way. And he can create in that way. So that's what I understood from the questioner and the answer.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. It is like a tough topic. It's a tough topic. Let me give it another try. So, starting from Abdurrahman's question. So this is coming after the sixth. And in the sixth, what he is saying is power of choice is a relative entity, relative existence. It does not have an external existence, and it does not have the power to create anything. After this, the asker says, well, if it is like you say so, then that means two identical things would be put in front of me, and I will be free to go with one or the other. But this is contradicting that rule, which he thinks to be a rule, which is tercih bila murajjih is impossible. And tercih bila murajjih meaning I cannot choose one thing over the other. Practically, how do we do this generally? Like the fatalist would say as, if I am doing this because I had to do this, like I was impelled to do it because it was more likely to be chosen by me. So somebody made it more choosable, and I chose it as such, tercih, because otherwise it's impossible according to the rule, the asker says, and the rule being tercih bila murajjih is impossible. Choosing of the two identical things among two identical things is impossible, is the asker's question. But the author says no. Yeah, yes, well, go ahead.
This is where I was confused from the English translation. Is he saying the cause of the preference itself, or the cause or the ability to cause the preference to be? That was my confusion about his.
The translation is a little off in there because the translator used the same word preference for tercih and tarajjuh. So let's fix that. Like if you have the physical copy in front of you, first sentence, instead of it, write tercih bila murajjih is impossible. Tercih means to choose. Murajjih means an inherent superiority or a superiority. So choosing without any superiority is impossible, is the claim. Like if I have two apples in front of me, the asker says, if I am choosing one over the other, there must exist some sort of a superiority of one over the other inherently. And this is why I find myself choosing the other one. Maybe it is more shiny, maybe it's more red or whatever. There is something more superior, is the asker asking. And says, since this is the case, since the asker takes it as a rule, but if this is the case, then it would mean, whereas part says, but in the previous paragraph, you said that, no, I am free to choose among two things. Then this is demolishing that rule, he says. And the author says, you are wrong. There's no such rule. Tercih bila murajjih is not a rule. Tarajjuh bila murajjih is a rule. Says, if one thing is superior than the other, then there must exist someone who chose one to be superior than the other. Tarajjuh means something being superior. Tarajjuh, something like one apple being better than the other or superior than the other, is impossible without a murajjih, somebody who is making one superior than the other. Tarajjuh bila murajjih is impossible. This is the rule.
So he's essentially saying things sound fatalistic. Like, where's my choice? That's just a question of what the questioner is asking, essentially.
So, Yusuf,
Yes.
who asks this question? Who says, or in what condition Yusuf says, tercih bila müreccih muhaldir?
So
Impossible.
yeah, someone, and actually I know someone like this, who says, I am choosing, or actually the person that I met was saying that all my choices are deterministic. I am choosing because I have to choose. And in this day and age, actually, this is materialistic perspective. Like if you go to a psychiatrist with any, let's say, mental issues, then they would say, oh, this is because you are missing that protein, that something. And actually, there was such a, I read it some time ago. It was saying that according to psychiatrists, all the killers or people do it because of a reason. There is some material reason behind it from materialistic perspective. And then the law people say, oh, let the people in the jail don't hear that because we are judging them as if they are free in their choices. But what you are saying, scientific community, in terms of people's choices are, there's no free choice. It is your, whatever you ate in the morning, like you ate carrot too much, this is why you killed that person. Like as if all of those choices are because you had to choose it. So the asker in here is saying that this perspective, like I wouldn't have chosen it if I didn't have to. I chose it because of the environment, because of how I was raised in the childhood, whatever.
Because one of them was superior than the other, and I had to choose.
Yeah.
Nice.
And this is not only like Qadariya or like far-fetched ancient theology. This is a perspective which today is like actually the most prevalent materialistic perspective says this. Judiciary system is not aligned with this is another question. But if the society was consistent in itself, then the materialist society shouldn't be putting anybody into the jail because it is because of everything is material and everything is happening deterministically. Why are you putting that person into the jail? I mean, he didn't do anything wrong. He just did whatever he had to do it. So you shouldn't be punishing that person. I guess this is the point.
You don't have to take it as punishment. Like you can take the jail part as a part of the determinism as well. Like we're putting them there because, they are meant to be there.
Yeah. There's another way to take it. Yes, Suhail, please go ahead.
Well, so yeah, I mean, so that, yeah, I guess the translation it's not clear to me, but so essentially what the person's saying that, if I choose something because it's superior, because I deem it superior or it's inherently superior, then what choice do I really have? Because I was compelled to make that choice. In other words, I don't have there's no human will or human choice in the matter. So if, as you said, which, if it's not just in medicine too, where people make, people make certain lifestyle choices and they choose to do that because they are compelled to do that. It's a way to absolve like a human being a sort of personal responsibility. As you said, whether it's to do, whatever lifestyle choice somebody makes. And I guess his answer then is, or his answer to that question then is, well, I guess I'll let you, because it's still the English translation of his answer maybe is not clear to me still. So.
Yeah, so there, the author's point is, terajjuh bila murajjih is impossible. So if something is deemed superior than the other, then there must be someone who made it superior than the other. This is why I gave the example of Satan. Satan thought that inherently fire was superior than clay, no, fire would be made superior than clay. If it is superior, then there must be someone who made it superior. So nothing is inherently, and this is why in general, actually, in Nursi's writings, as he's following that logic, he says contingent beings, where the existence is just likely to happen. It's not a necessary existence. So if somebody, actually he's using this at some point, he says, if to exist and not to exist, the balance between them is imbalanced, then things come into being. So the creator chose things to come into existence. This is why they are here. Like if we apply the same logic to existence, it would be a thing wouldn't happen if somebody didn't choose it to happen, because to exist or not to exist was equally likely for that. If it is in existence, now I am applying the second rule, if it is in existence, then that means there must exist someone who chose it. Like tarajjuh bila murajjih is impossible. Existence being superior than or more likely than non-existence for a thing is impossible unless somebody chose it to exist. So this is how the author is fixing the idea and
Well,
saying that, yeah.
How about the sentence, but preference? I still I'm confused about what he's saying in the sentence. But preference without something to cause is permissible and occurs. I don't understand the translation of that.
The second one, tercih bila murajjih is possible.
Is it this one?
No, the third sentence.
But the preference without something to cause it.
Okay. So it does.
Tercih bila murajjih.
Yeah. Now he is referring back to what the asker said. The asker used to say, tercih bila murajjih is muhal or impossible. He says no. Tercih bila murajjih is jaiz, possible, and it's happening actually. He says, tercih bila murajjih. This is what your choice is doing always. Like the power of choice you experience, the 24/7. This is what it does.
It chooses.
It chooses among equally likely choices in front of you. I mean, you are equally distant, if you like. It's not that you are compelled to choose one over the other, or you are not choosing because one is better than the other. You are put equally distant, and then if now we apply it to what he was saying in the sixth, you are put in equal distance to two choices. And what you are supposed to do is to change your relative position to make yourself closer to one than the other. That's all you do. This is your choice, actually. By inclining towards one of them, this is why he talked about all these words, inclination or disposal within inclination. As you change your relative position, one of them becomes your truth, the other one becomes falsehood for you. So it's not that they are inherently or different relative to you. By changing your relative position relative to them, one of them becomes your choice. Did you change anything in reality? No, just your position relative to them has changed. This is why you didn't create anything. This is why we were talking about this relative matter, theoretical or relative matter. I mean, to talk about it, let's say there are two balls in front of me, and I'm in the middle of them. Then I move left, and now I am to the left of both balls. I didn't change anything other than my relative position. So me being to the left of them, to the right of them, I mean, these are relative matters which does not have an external existence in and of myself or in and of themselves with the balls. It is a matter which is depending on how I am locating myself. So in terms of choices also, there are two choices put in front of me, but relative to me, they are equally correct, equally incorrect. So I mean, in terms of likelihood, relative to my choice, they are equal. But Quran says choose this, Satan says choose that. This is another part. They do not affect my choice, but considering them, I'm going to locate myself to the left or to the right or whatever. So this is, I am free in that. And there's nothing that is demolishing this rule. The author says there's no such rule, which is choosing without a superiority. There's no such rule. Yes, Suhail.
That makes sense. Thank you. So yeah, I guess that the flaw in this person's reasoning is, or anybody's reasoning, is that, as you said, and as he points out earlier, is that by giving human choice an external reality when there's no such thing, like you can't, because if you, I guess in the example as you were saying, given the choice between an apple and an orange, and maybe I choose an apple because I was compelled. Like, in other words, it's like giving your choice some sort of external reality when there's no such thing, that you can't demonstrate that sort of external reality. There's no, the choice only manifests, the moment as you said, your relative position changes. In other words, in which your position is in which you're eating the apple, I guess, rather than the orange. But you can't talk about your choice before it manifests, because choice by definition is a relative matter, and it's relative to the things that are out there. So if I only know, I guess, what my choice is and how it manifests relative to something else. So by saying I was compelled to eat the apple over the orange, there's really no basis, because you're saying that, again, trying to imagine an agent external to you, like already coming into, I guess, God's dominion, rather than making the choice and seeing, oh, as you said, I made the choice because these two things were equal before me, and I chose this out of my preference, and therefore that's my choice. That's the choice, and that's the acquisition I have, is that I'm eating the apple over the orange, rather than trying to imagine a God and saying, well, I was compelled to prefer this thing, because that's not, there's no, I guess, no evidence for it. That's not your reality. Your reality is that you have a preference, and you can choose or choose not to act on that preference, because they're equal before you. So well, I guess if you don't act on it, then it was your preference to not act on it. But you only realize that when you make the choice, I guess.
Well, Abdurrahman, you are choosing, Abdurrahman. Don't blame a chooser for your choices. I mean, this was what I understand as the relevant point of it to you. Is it relevant still or not? Abdurrahman?
Yes, that is a very relevant statement to understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I continue. Any comments? Last sentence to me is very interesting, powerful, but I'm not sure that I can fully understand. The will is an attribute, and its mark is to perform a work such as that. Such as that is choosing. Not choosing, but to choose. Because the next one will differentiate between to choose and choosing. So it's job to choose. It's as if, so I'm trying to find an example. So when I say, no, it's not the same, sorry. I'm trying to find an example, the analogy in things other than human beings. Something doing something. But it shouldn't have a will in the example.
Yeah, form is falling, but it's not its attribute. Like form is not the falling object, right? So you see form being created in a falling action, but it's not an attribute of the form.
Sun shining.
Maybe light illuminating, something like that. So there, for instance, you don't try to attribute the cause or this action to the light itself. You say, this is how it is created. And you are fine with it. So there is no contradiction in your belief. You say, the light and brightness or illumination. Illumination is its attribute, and this is how it is created. So author says something similar for will as well. Because when we say to choose, that I made a choice, in English we say I made a choice. So there is an action there, as if you did something. So you caused something, right? You created something. Not the so Suhail, when I say you created something, I'm not referring to the output of your choice. I'm referring to choosing itself, like you created choosing, as if, like, especially in English, it sounds like I made a choice. I created this choosing thing. Like when you say it's relative to other things, the choices, you locate yourself, you say, right? So you located, it's as if a verb, and the actor is you. You located yourself relative to something. So there's still a creation there. But as if I'm not mistaken, again, this is something I couldn't understand wholly in its entirety. But the author says, actually, the will is an attribute. This is what it does. So the light illuminates, the power of choice or will chooses. It is how it is created. So there is no action there. I guess seeing is a good example, because when we say I see, so we don't necessarily attribute a creation to ourselves. We say I made in a way to see it. This is what I call as seeing. So it's not like, I made myself see. It's I see. This is how I'm created. The same way I choose. This is how I am created. I'm not acting. So anyway.
Yes. Now Abdurrahman is lost. Are you happy? Abdurrahman, are you still there?
I am here in physical body.
Okay. See, Alhamdulillah. Yes, Suhail, please go ahead.
That third sentence, I don't know if there's another way to interpret it, but preference without something to cause it is permissible, and of course what Birkan was saying, will is an attribute and its mark is to perform a work such as that. In other words, is he saying that the something he's referring to is something out there? So for example, if I have an apple and an orange in front of me, the apple and the orange are not compelling me to say which one is superior. They're not causing it. They in and of themselves are, in other words, they in and of themselves, as you said before, are equal before me. they don't express any superiority one over the other. There's nothing where you can point to and say, oh, the apple is saying it's superior over the orange, so choose me. In other words, I'm being compelled to make a choice of the apple over the orange. Rather, the preference is already within me to choose one over the other. What I do is irrelevant, but it's not coming from the apple or the orange in and of themselves. It's coming from me. Will is an attribute. In other words, that preference belongs to me. It's my attribute. It's not the attribute of the apple or the orange imposing itself on me. And its mark is to perform a work such as that. In other words, to exhibit preference of one thing over the other. That's the point of will. It doesn't create. It doesn't create, nor is it fatalistic or determined by outside things. In other words, it's being imposed upon by the apple or over the orange. No, but simply it expresses preference because it's my preference. It's not the apple's preference over the orange or the orange's preference over the apple. It's my preference. Therefore, you can't say that it was compelled upon me to kill somebody innocent. No, but that's my preference, and the will is mine. It's my attribute as a human being. So it's my work because that will belongs to me, not because something external to me, something, as he says, something external to me caused me to make it superior to kill somebody rather than not kill somebody. That's all from me. Whereas now, I guess now, at least if I understand correctly, whereas the questioner is saying preference without a cause or attribute to cause the preference is impossible. In other words, he's saying that, oh, if you're saying everything has cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, well then how about the cause for my preference? Doesn't the as you were saying, don't my genes compel me to kill somebody and make me angry or live a certain lifestyle, this or that? In other words, giving an external reality to giving essentially an external reality to my choice. It's like making choice like a match and a piece of paper. In other words, if I bring two things together, something's going to happen. But as he points out, he says in the previous section, choice or human will isn't external. There's no, you can't actually point to, like, where is human will out there? No one can actually point to it. They can point to my body, they can point to my material body, but they can't actually point to my choice, my will. They can point to the manifestation of my choice, but they can't in and of itself point to the ability to choose, the attribute of, of choice, or the attribute of choosing. Not the choice itself, but my attribute of doing so. And so, as you said, or as he says also, it's all relative. In other words, I take a relative position between an apple and orange, or killing or not killing somebody, because choices have an external reality. You can't say it's not like a match and a piece of paper. You can't say it's the same thing, cause and effect, because cause and effect only pertains to things that have external realities. But choice doesn't have an external reality. So how can you say you're being compelled? The choice or my preference is being acted upon by something else, as if it's like a match lighting a piece of paper, because you're falsely imagining that will has an external reality. It doesn't. You can't actually demonstrate it. Where is it in the world that you can demonstrate in and of itself, demonstrate will? You can't like delineate between will and the there's no such thing. You can't just show me will in front of me. So I don't know if that's what he's saying here, but that's kind of what I took away from the last two sentences.
Thank you. Good point. There is one question which is, I think the author is not addressing here, maybe because it's not that much relevant. But when we say choice do not have external existence, like since it's a relative matter, what do you mean by that? Becomes a question, like, because he's not providing any explanation for that. Like, well, okay, it doesn't have a flesh and bones or material-like existence, but does it not exist? What I mean by that is, for example, ideas. Ideas don't have like the material existence that I would think of, but does that mean that they do not have external existence? So what I would think here is the author is not really concerned about explaining, again, the mechanism of how you position yourself relative to two things and whatnot. The point he is trying to make here is that such a thing, this relative existence is a thing, and because what he's trying to show here is that a contradiction does not exist, and he says if you take power of choice in this regard, then there wouldn't be any contradiction, because the asker was saying that there's a contradiction, and he says, well, there is no contradiction in this case, because this is not an existence as you know of what existence is, and yet it's not giving creative power to anything either. So the thing that were concerning you about being a contradiction wouldn't happen if I'm just giving you an example of some things, some example for which it does not really exist, yet exists sort of a thing, but I'm not concerned about defining it to you. As he, at the very beginning, he established, he says, I'm not going to try to define you the nature of power of choice, but I'm going to show you some example of a relative existence which does not have existence in a sense. And then, since it does not exist really in the sense of existing, which you would say is impossible for a creation to create, then the contradiction is removed, which was your concern. So this is why, and let me see, Abdurrahman is here. There was a paper that I read through Aishanur was sent me at some point. There was this question. The guy was asking, why don't you define how you are locating yourself relative to another thing then? Actually, the author of that paper was challenging sort of Maturidi and Ash'ari, saying that although they gave this example, they didn't define what it means to locate yourself relative to another thing. How is this happening? Was the question of that author. But it's not the point, really. They don't need to define how this relative positioning happens, because they are not trying to define the nature of power of choice. They're just trying to remove the contradiction in your perception, is my understanding, or at least this is how the Nursi is approaching the matter. He's saying that I'm not trying to prove you or explain you its nature. I'm just trying to remove a contradiction in your mind, which happens because of this, taking it as external existence. Suhail, please go ahead.
I mean, to me, the real question is, how is it even possible to define something relative? Because by definition, I guess, when you define something, you are not making it relative. I mean, you are trying to give it some sort of external reality or define it, put some boundaries around it. But how do you really define anything relative? By definition, something relative is relative to everything else that you define. In other words, like you can't speak of it independently. And that's why you can't really talk about it. Like, I guess people think, oh, that's so, oh, well, then you're not explaining anything. But that's the explanation, is that you can't define it per se in its reality. You can just simply say, this is your experience of choice, and this is what's happening, and we can talk about what this means, and what impact or significance it has. But as you said, you can't actually talk about how it's happening, because by definition that would require you to define something that by definition is undefinable, because it's all relative. So that's the flaw, I think, in that reasoning, is that you can't define something that's relative.
Alhamdulillah, let's say, for today, or for that part. Any other comments? It's a tough topic. So let's be thankful to our Creator for whatever made us understand so far, and improve us in understanding, inshallah. I will read the next question if there is no comment. If you ask, since the one who creates the murder is Almighty God, why do you call me a murderer? So I'm reading this question in the light of the previous question. The previous question, the asker was saying that, oh, God made killing more likely to me. This is why I killed the person. But the author said, no, you were equally distant in terms of that killing. You chose to kill, so this is why. So there is no fatalism in this sense. But then the asker says, okay, let me accept this. But then death or the murder is being created by Almighty God. So even if I choose it, he creates the murder. Why do you call me a murderer? At the end of the day, I just chose, as if saying that, kill this guy, I said, but I didn't really kill. Death is created by the Creator. So he's the killer, I'm not, I'm just a chooser. Why do you call me a murderer? The answer is an interesting answer. Because according to the rules of grammar, the active participle is derived from the infinitive, which is a relative matter.
Active participle meaning ism file.
Dur.
Yes, dur.
Okay. Because according to the rules of grammar, dur is derived from the infinitive, which is a relative matter.
And infinitive is the master.
Like to kill.
To kill. Yes.
Okay. So the dur,
Killer. The
Yeah.
word killer.
the word killer, is derived from the verb to kill.
Not the verb. The word.
The word
Because
to
it's
kill.
noun.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
To kill.
Okay. The active participle, the killer, is derived from to kill, which is a relative matter. To kill is a relative matter. It cannot be derived from, I guess it refers to killer. Killer cannot be derived from the verbal noun,
Which is killing.
which is killing or murder, which is an actual or existent matter. The infinitive, the dur, is our acquisition, so we are called the murderer. The verbal noun, in this case, murder or killing, is Almighty God's creature. Something which gives an inkling of responsibility cannot be derived from the verbal noun. Like the responsibility cannot be attributed to the result, which is killing, because the triggering thing here is the to kill was done by you. Like to choose was done by the killer, which is you. So since you initiated the action, you take the responsibility and you get the noun of being the doer. So here, I guess, in plain English, how I understand about this is, I am the mafia boss, and I am hiring someone to shoot somebody else, but I call that person to go and shoot that person. So I am the chooser. So I am really the murderer. The other person is just as if slaughtering someone. Like he's doing his job to get money.
Plain English.
to get
Mafia, slaughtering.
to get money to his children. So anyways, this is again
There's also blood in the sentence.
so
Make it even more plainer English.
more graphic. Okay, so here, please go ahead.
This is an interesting explanation. I guess if you go to the first, he's making a distinction between to kill, killer, and killing. And the reason what he's saying is that the killer and to kill are related because to kill implies there must be a killer. But killing, or the act of killing, if you go to the, what does he say about that? It cannot be at the second page. He's saying, I guess, killing in and of itself, you can't, I don't, I have to think about this, but I don't know how well it, makes sense in English, but so he's saying killing in and of itself is an event. It's an actual happening, as it says, actual or existent matter. Killing in and of itself, it's something that happens or is witnessed. Whereas to kill and killer, to kill is, as he says, a relative matter. In other words, it's, there isn't like it's a universal term, I guess, or it's not something that's defined. You can't, like, to kill is not a definite event or term or happening, and neither is, in a sense, killer. In other words, there's no sort of I guess time component to those things. Like when you talk about killer and to kill, killer coming from to kill, there's no time component to it, because somebody can be called a killer. I don't know why I keep using this word, but or murderer.
Author, maybe.
Huh?
The author, but it's not a good example, because then, like a writing, to write, an author.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway.
Maybe, I mean, he brings up murder. So to murder, murderer, and murdering. The murderer. You can speak about the murderer independent of, like, I guess, like there's, I guess, maybe no time component, whereas murdering fixes it to an actual or existent matter. The infinitive is our acquisition. In other words, I only become a murderer when I murder. In other words, to murder is the relative. In other words, you can't define murder, the act of murder, or the idea of murder, until I become murderer, until it actually happens. So we are called a murderer, as he says. So I acquire that at that moment. The infinitive, in other words, the relative matter. The verbal noun is Almighty God's creature. In other words, the actual murdering, so to speak, or the event in and of itself, I haven't acquired murdering in and of itself, because that has an external reality. So my choice can't acquire external things, because in and of itself, it also is relative. So I can't say I created the murdering event or the event in and of itself. But at the same time, I can't say Almighty God is a murderer, because the murderer only made itself known, or him or herself known, at the moment it was acquired, or where it happened to be. In other words, where the murder actually happened. So at least that's what I understand, because the matter is relative. I don't know, that's kind of a bit confusing, maybe, explanation, but so I don't know if anybody has a better explanation than that.
So I took it in a simpler form, in which, like, the question was, like, you calling me killer, as if I do something, I did the killing. Why you are calling me killer? Because the action and its consequences, both the action and the consequences, killing and death. It's created by God. So why you are calling me killer? I'm not the one who is doing something. This ER is like I don't deserve it. As if. And the author says, you took it wrong. Your grammar is not perfect. In English, I mean, it applies to English as well, but I guess it becomes clearer in Arabic. So author says, oh, you mixing things. The word killer is not derived from the verbal noun, meaning we don't call you killer because you did the killing. We call you killer because you chose to kill. So the killing itself, the action, the knife, penetrating the skin, and then the blood coming out, the guy screaming, and then you took the knife, out, and put it again. And anyway, all these things are being created. The killing is being created by God. That's true. But you are the one who chose to kill. Hence the name killer. And you deserve it. That's how I understood. Well, please go ahead.
I think if I put it into like sentence form, he killed him. So in other words, he, like the doer, the murderer, acquired from the verb to kill or to murder. In other words, the acquisition of the responsibility or the agent in which to murder became manifest is the doer, which is me, like, or him. He murdered him. So it only it became from relative to murder to actual by the one who did it. However, murdering, like saying murdering is bad or killing is bad, that's a very general, the verbal noun in of itself. You're just talking about the idea of killing, which is an event that happens. Like you're talking about something that has an external reality. But when you say killing is bad or murdering is bad, who's the doer there? Who's the agent? Who's the responsible party? You don't talk about the responsible party in those situations. You just talk about the act of killing or act of murdering in and of itself is bad. So there's no agent that you can ascribe to it at that point, which is why he says you can't ascribe the event itself or the act itself to God. In other words, you're the murderer, not him, because when you talk about killing or murdering, there's no doer, there's no agent there per se, as in saying that they are the murderer, because you can say killing is bad, but without any reference to a killer. There's no reference to a killer. Or murdering is bad, because you're just talking about the idea, the act in and of itself, without an agent. And so if you're talking about the act in and of itself, you can talk about the act in and of itself without an agent. That means that the manifestation of the act cannot be ascribed to the one who gave it being, because they aren't the one that triggered the act to even take place. So they're not the murderer, but the one to which they made the relative real. In other words, they made the relative matter of to murder, the action itself. They made it manifest or triggered it, belongs to the doer or the active participle, which is the murderer. Because in that situation, we're not talking about the theoretical idea or the idea of murdering and killing. We're talking about actual events now. And the person to trigger that, or the agent to trigger that, is the person or the human being. They're the ones triggering that, not God.
Abdurrahman, are you still there?
Inshallah, I'm here. Yes.
Okay, so are you okay for us to finish for today's discussion? What do you think?
I think give me some action items and we can end the discussion, inshallah.
Okay, action items. Abdurrahman, don't escape. You are responsible.
Don't kill.
And don't kill. But I guess, long story short, do not blame others. If you choose it, you choose it. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين الفاتحة